Welcome to the HeartKids podcast. My name is Tahnee Jash. I'm a proud Yuin Kombumerri woman and a journalist. I was also born with a heart condition. And over the next few weeks, I'll be presenting a series of episodes looking at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's experiences of childhood heart disease.
Yeah, I think I must have felt quite lonely, quite frightened, especially just on the eve of the operation, because I just didn't know what to expect.
Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge that this podcast is being recorded on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, otherwise known as Sydney. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and the land that you're listening in from today. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and pass that respect on to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander listeners. Today on From the Heart, we speak with Marjorie Doyle, a Kombumerri woman who was born with TOF and had surgery at the age of 13 in 1968. Hi, Marjorie. How are you? Thanks for joining us on the podcast today. How are you feeling? How are you going?
Oh, a little bit nervous, but I'm fine.
Oh, don't be nervous. I'm friendly. I won't bite.
Oh, it's just a technical thing.
Oh, the technical stuff. Yeah, well, you're all good on my end. So where are you joining us from today? Tell me a little bit about the country you're on and where your mob's from.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm originally from, Mum's people are from the Kombumerri people, which along the Nerang River, the Gold Coast, but I'm not coming to you from there. I'm coming from Lowood, west of Brisbane, about 67 kilometres out of Brisbane, where I live now.
You're not too far from your traditional country?
No.
Oh, lovely. No. Lovely. So you were born with a heart condition, a congenital heart condition, actually, and at the age of 6 months old, your GP picked it up because they heard you had like a swoosh or like a murmur in your heart. Is that correct?
That's right. There was no distinct heartbeat. Mum said that it's just a whooshing sound. And so further tests, I don't know what they did in those days, but it revealed Tetralogy of Fallot.
Yeah, right. And can you tell me a little bit about what the heart condition that you were born with? Can you share a little bit about what that is for people who might not be familiar with TOF?
Sure. Well, it used to be known as being born a blue baby because the tips of your finger, the oxygen's not able to be pumped around your body effectively. So the tips of your fingers and your lips are blue. And that's because the blood is not being oxygenated around the body properly. And it's because of this, a fault in 4 chambers of the heart, I think. Something like that. Yeah.
Right. And your GP noticed that when you were 6 months old, but then you didn't have surgery until you were 13. Is that correct?
That's correct. I was supposed to have surgery when I was 8, but my file got lost at the hospital. No computers in those days. So I started to deteriorate quite badly. And
oh my goodness.
Yeah, I was walking home from school one day and my mother rang the hospital and I almost collapsed. And so my mother chased it up and they had lost my file or something. So then they moved pretty quickly then. They said she's got to have an operation before the year's out.
That must have been really scary for your mum, I imagine. Like, you were walking home from school and going through that. Can you share with me a little bit about what that was like? Do you remember that moment or was it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've never known what a normal childhood was like. I used to run around and try and keep up with the kids at primary school. But I was always a bit slower and I'd always sit and get past. But this day was particularly bad. I remember nearly collapsing and fainting. And it was a really hot day because being in Queensland. And that's when my mother got very frightened. And then she was told that I had to have an operation by the end of the year. Otherwise, if I didn't have an operation soon, I'd be an invalid for sure by the age of 16 and I would not see my 30th birthday. So things moved pretty quickly from there.
Oh my goodness, that would have been so scary and, traumatic. I mean, like hearing that 30, not living till you're 30 years old, that's so young still, like.
That's right. Well, to me as a kid, I wasn't told that. Mum told me this later, that that's the choice she had to make. If I didn't have heart surgery, I'd certainly be an invalid, full-class invalid by 16, and probably I wouldn't have made it to 30. That's how it was put to her. So, yeah, it was a no-brainer. She just had to put me in for surgery.
Yeah, it became, the most important thing, a priority for her and for you. And when you were young, when you were a little girl, because you had this condition, was there certain things that, your mum had to do to keep you healthy and strong, or was there sort of things that you weren't able to do that other kids could do? Like you were just describing there about, running and how that was a bit of a challenge.
Well, I was told to avoid crowds, and I was told I couldn't compete in sport, but I didn't know what normal or not normal was. So I ran around with all the other kids as best I could, but I was not fast as them, and I'd get puffed pretty quickly. And I don't know whether you're aware, but Tetralogy of Fallot children often squat, and it looks so bizarre because they'll just squat where they are and regain their breath, and then they'll get up and start running with all the kids. Yeah. But I started to deteriorate when I got my first year of high school, 13. Yeah.
Wow.
So I rapidly downhill. Yeah.
Goodness. And, when I'm looking at the dates there, you had surgery in 1968. What was the sort of, obviously we've come a long way now in 2023 with health services, and I mean, there's still things that we can improve on, but we know health services have improved and the support systems in place. What was it like for you back then when you was, kind of experiencing this really sort of, it's quite a serious condition, from what I've read.
It is, and the surgery is open heart surgery, and so for me I was still a bit of a kid really, so it didn't really, and I think when you're a young person, you don't really think, oh, this terrible thing is happening to me. You just kind of accept it, and I probably have blocked a lot of it out because I can remember it probably was frightening, but I never thought, oh, I'm going to die. There's a possibility I might die in surgery, which apparently I nearly did. It didn't occur to me because I think when you're young, you don't think you're going to die. Yeah.
You're sort of a bit more fearless, hey?
Yeah, I think it's harder for your parents or your mother or father or whatever.
That's right. And did your mum ever tell you stories about sort of going through that experience with you as a young girl?
She was always worried, but basically she didn't sort of wrap me up in cotton wool. She did keep me away from crowds, but she just let me be a normal person. And, I don't think that I was ever aware until much later. And then she told me just how tenuous my life had at times been, especially during surgery. Apparently, they nearly lost me twice, but I only found that out in later years when she told me. Yeah.
Well, she did a good job then, hey, just kind of...
Oh, she did. And she wasn't an educated person, so she did very well. Yeah.
You still got to enjoy your childhood like every other, like your peers and your friends.
Yeah, I did. And I can remember, because my grandmother lived at the Nerang River, it wasn't like it is now with canal estates. You can't imagine it. So we used to just jump in dinghies and row up and down the estuaries. And none of us, it sounds terrible now, but none of us back then, you didn't wear a life jacket. And I don't know what I'd do if the thing capsized, or because I could tread water, but I wasn't a very good swimmer. But yeah, I wasn't wrapped in cotton wool. I think she had too many other worries. But yeah, she certainly did her best to look after me.
Yeah, I think that it's really lovely that you were able to still enjoy your childhood and, join in on those activities, even though some of them could have been slightly dangerous, like that one swimming in the river there.
Yeah. Well, I've got 2 adopted children that are grown up now, but I look back and think, my goodness, I would never let them without a life jacket in a dinghy on the, but times have changed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess they're lovely memories that you're able to look back on now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you were describing the event that you had when you were walking home from school and you knew something wasn't right, can you take me back to that moment and describe sort of what that was like for you and for your mum as well, like what you guys were sort of feeling? And
that was the turning point for me, because I still wasn't aware that, look, I could lose my life or anything like that. I just ran out of breath and I just felt very faint. It was terribly hot, but it was a hot day anyway. But I saw all the kids walking along the street and I suddenly couldn't. And I just plopped down in the gutter. And then my friend Rosie, my best friend, she ran home to get my mother. And I can't remember what happened after that, how we got me home. But then shortly after that, she contacted the hospital and they said, get her up here immediately, and surgery was scheduled and that sort of thing.
Yeah, wow. And do you remember what the hospitals were like back then?
Yes, I do. Prince Charles, they were very good. The staff was excellent, but there were I was on the children's ward and there were other children with similar problems, and also, but there was no decorations, there was no frills like there is now. No, I think we went to school each day. The ward had a small little school room and we'd knock off at school at 1:00.
And what about, do you remember, so the equipment that they used? Nowadays we've got x-rays and we've got all the...
Yeah, nothing like that. Well, they had x-rays and I think they had angiograms, but there was no MRIs. We got physios come in and I honestly can't recall. I mean, after surgery, that was something else, but the technology was not like it is now.
Yeah. It's very different. And what was when you had that open heart surgery, it's a really big surgery to have at such a young age, how was your recovery? How long did it take you to recover, and sort of, were there any things that you did that helped push you through that?
Oh, well, the recovery was easy. Well, I noticed straight away that I could breathe well. The surgery took 6.5 hours back then.
Oh, goodness.
And yeah, they're very good. Even without the technology they have today, I did recover. But sadly, when I got home, it took I can't remember how long. I think I was in the hospital 4 weeks. But then when I went home, I had an infection happen at the site of the wound, where one of the blood transfusion tubes or whatever was now scar tissue. I had to go, it got infected, and not through any fault of mum's or mine. We were hygienic, but it just got infected. And so I had to be readmitted to hospital, and they fixed that up and then put me on masses of antibiotics, which, yeah, I noticed a difference. Straight after the operation, I could breathe better and my life was turned about, really.
Yeah, and I guess that was when you noticed that there was something wrong, hey, when all of those years when you were, yeah.
Yeah, and the only thing was, they informed my mother, oh, well, you're fixed up now, you're repaired, but they now know that's kind of a false understanding of the reality of things, because the truth is, you will never have a normal heart, having been born with a congenital heart defect. It can only be repaired. It can't ever be a new heart. However, it was 100% better than what the previous one was like. I could function, I could run. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, what was life like for you after that? What were some of the things that you could do that you weren't able to do before?
Oh, just be a normal teenager. Just, ride a bike and just walk around and run, and I did well, really. Yeah, I was always still a bit slower than, other kids. I would walk slower. I was still slow, but nowhere near as, I never felt breathless. Yeah.
And when we were talking about the hospital, you mentioned that, the children's ward was a little bit different to the children's wards today. It's a very sort of, when you go to the children's wards today, it's very animated. There's beautiful sort of artwork and things around the place to make it feel like a nice, safe environment for kids and for families to visit. Did you get to have your family there with you to support you through that recovery process and through your surgery, or what was that like?
No, it wasn't like it is today, and where families are encouraged. And plus I come from a broken home, so there was really only my mother, and, I can't remember who came to see me, but no, I was on my own a lot, well, surrounded by staff, but they did not cater for children as they do now. But I have to say that the staff were good. They were very good. And so, yeah.
Do you remember feeling like sort of, I think when you're that young and you don't have your mum there, it can be quite frightening and scary.
Yeah.
Did you remember feeling like that?
Oh, definitely. My mother was all I had. I had older brothers and an older sister. And my older sister she came up to see me, and I can't remember who else came. I can only remember my mother coming. But visiting hours were only at certain times. And yes, I was lonely for my mother, and I did cry, I think, sometimes. I can't remember. Yeah.
Yeah, I think any child at that age going through open heart surgery would feel the same way.
Yeah, I think I must have felt quite lonely, quite frightened, especially just on the eve of the operation, because I just didn't know what to expect. But I never sort of thought I'm going to die or anything.
Yeah. And did they sort of, it's probably more of a question for your mum, I guess, but just, the hospital system, or not really the hospital system, but like when you're getting medical information, sometimes it can be very overwhelming, or it's hard to understand what's going on.
Well, Mum, as I said, she did her very best. She was a very intelligent woman, but she had only been educated to the age of 13, and then she had to work. So she was trying to understand what the doctors were telling her. And as I said, she was extremely intelligent, but I know that she would have been overwhelmed. But she just got on with it, as they did in those days. She just coped, and I never saw her cry. I don't recall. She was very stoic, my mother. She just held it together, and so
she's a strong woman.
Very strong woman, yeah, very strong woman.
Do you have any siblings, or are you an only child?
I'm the youngest.
Oh, sorry, you had an older sister, hey?
Yeah, she's passed away, but I have two older brothers still, yeah.
There's 4 of you all together?
Yeah, I'm the youngest, yep.
You're the baby of the family.
That's correct.
Oh. So I heard that when you recovered from your infection and then you came home, but then you guys moved to a new place north of Brisbane.
Right. That's right. And something I raised once because I think these things are understood a lot better now, but we had to move. My mother, we had to move for family reasons. We had to move to a safe place. So I really didn't have any convalescence. And then I had to move to a new school, a new area where no one knew us, no one knew me. And I had started a new school. And, in those days, I don't know about other parents, but Mum wouldn't have gone down there to see the teachers to tell them that, look, I've just recovered from major surgery. So there was no, trying to look for the word, there was no, nowadays you sort of tend to think about trauma, and I just survived major surgery, and here I was having to move from our home at Silmia to another school where I didn't know anyone. And, yeah, it was really, really quite tough. I knew no one. I was very lonely, yeah.
Did you have any other family members there, or so it was just brand new?
Brand new, no one. Only my mother, and she had her problems and her plate was full of stuff. But my grandmother was my safe harbour, but she lived on the coast, so we could only get to see her now and again. But, yeah, there was no one really for kids in those days. And if there was, I wouldn't have known who. Certainly not teachers, yeah.
And how did you kind of get through that period of your life? Like, you know, you just come out of surgery, you've moved to a new school, you know, you're sort of out of your comfort zone there and there's not much support around you.
Totally. I think I made some friends with people that were a bit like me. They liked reading. We were I suppose you'd say, nerds now in the class. We liked reading. And so I made a few good friends. I gradually made a new group of friends. And I'm trying to think what it was. But really, there was not that to help the children. There was no sort of counselling. There was no sort of helping or, you know, the worst was I had to run in a cross-country race. I've never done that in my life.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, on the day, I can still remember that day. It was just terrible because although I had heart surgery, I really wasn't up to that. And I don't think anybody realised. I was so embarrassed. It was a humiliation. I come not just last, but I come disastrously last. I trailed behind all the other kids. And I can remember no one said a word. No one said congratulations or, well, you did it. You raced, you know, you made it. There was nothing like that. That was totally ignored. And I felt I wanted to just shrink.
Oh, Marge, yeah, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, so that was one. I did end up enjoying volleyball. The one where you get the net, yeah.
Yep, that's volleyball.
Yeah, I like that, but it was tough there for a while, yeah.
What helped you get through that? Did you just kind of push on through and then you could, because you had a new circle of friends, you know?
Yeah, I think for the rest of my teenage years, I just pushed through and eventually I got a faith. I found a faith and that stood me in good stead, yeah, many a time.
The school didn't, you know, just thinking about that cross-country sort of experience there, the school didn't ask about any health conditions before these activities, because that can be quite strenuous for some kids.
Oh, strenuous. I think that was terribly, I don't think it was a wise thing to put someone like me in a cross-country race. And in those, I was still thick thin. I was like a grasshopper. I was so thin, even post-surgery. But they just, I don't know that they even knew I'd had surgery. I don't recall, but no concessions were made.
Wow, and that's really dangerous, isn't it? Just like, you know, kind of putting you into that.
Well, because you wouldn't tell a person go and run a marathon if they've never done it before. If they are healthy, you'd never say that. You'd say that nothing was. I don't think they had a grasp of kids' needs in those days.
If you could have your time again, what would you kind of like the school to have done, or what do you think could have made your experience better?
Oh, just educate the teachers. And nowadays there's a lot of education around, well, I don't know whether there's enough, but some children come from traumatised backgrounds, that sort of thing. I just think and probably some counselling. I mean, it's still not I don't think there's still enough counselling for kids at school. Not really, but especially not then. I was so shy too. I'd do a lot more informative education of teachers about health conditions of all sorts, mental health too.
Yeah, mental health is a really important area, and I think that's one that we don't talk enough about sometimes, and there's a lot of shame and stigma sort of around it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that that's totally improved because, there's still a lot of bullying of children, and so I'm not saying, there was a lot more done now than there was then.
And if we fast forward to your adulthood, life in your 20s and 30s, did you have any experiences with managing your heart condition or any events, anything that sort of happened during those years, or was it sort of pretty cruisy, like after your surgery?
Yeah, it was pretty good from all through my 20s and 30s. It was pretty good. And I thought I was pretty bulletproof from then on because I seemed to be able to keep up. I still got very fatigued. I always have done, but I could keep up with people and, eventually got a degree and then I went to work in health and I worked with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander population in the area of mental health, and I loved that job very, very much.
And was that sort of driven by some of your experiences through childhood?
Absolutely, because this is what I wanted to mention specifically. I felt I was contributing. I felt I was giving back my second chance to help other people. And at a time when mental illness was still very stigmatised, I just knew it was an illness. No one had to convince me. People even argue today, to pull your socks up, but I always knew the patients I worked with, they did more for me than I did for them because I felt that this was my second chance in life.
Looking at your work with the HeartKids Foundation, I heard that you had an experience with a family that really made a big impact on you, and it was to do with a young child that had a similar condition to yours. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. I went along to a HeartKids meeting. This was a meeting of adults that had heart problems, congenital heart disease. And I thought, I'd like to see who's there and who goes and what it's all about. So I wanted to meet people, survivors like myself. But I met mainly young people, and that was all right. That was nice. I didn't really meet many people my age, but I did meet a mother at one of those gatherings, and I felt really happy because she started talking to me, and her son he was a little boy, and he had the same condition that I was born with. And she was smiling and we were laughing. And she laughed and she said, "You wouldn't believe what he wants to be." And I said, "Oh, what?" And she said, "He wants to play football." And we both laughed. But she felt she nearly cried. And she said, "I feel like crying," because she said, "I look at you and here you are all these years later." And I said, "Yeah." And I know that what she was thinking, my son has a future.
Yeah.
He was a little fella then. And she was looking at me and I knew she was thinking, there's a future for my son. So I felt really happy about that.
That's so beautiful. And it's that you gave her hope, hey, seeing you.
Yeah. And I'm just an ordinary person, but just seeing someone survive so long after, that's what I like. We're just ordinary people, but we can give hope.
That's it. And especially when you're hearing, it's a serious condition, you're hearing all of these medical sort of examinations of what's going on in your body and the things that you can and can't do, and the doctor's telling you that you might not live till a certain age, and then seeing you would really, just sort of shine a bit of a positive light that you can push through it and that everything will be okay.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what I like to do. I haven't been overly involved in the fundraising or anything like that, but I think I wrote a page for the newsletter once, and there were a lot of Facebook comments from parents, and I was just chuffed. I was so happy because I thought to give people hope, it's not going to work every time for some children do cry, and I'm always sorry when I read that because I'm one of the lucky ones.
Yeah. And when you're looking at your experience and, as you're just saying, being one of the lucky ones, is there sort of now as an adult living with this condition for many years, is there anything that you've found difficult or in your sort of
Well, as I age, that there is residual trouble. Well, I'm trying to manage it, and my cardiologist is very good. And he suggested that one day I may need a pacemaker, but he said technology and maybe a pulmonary valve replacement, because as a person ages, and it's, as I said before, it's not a totally repaired heart surgery that you get. It's not totally flawless. You always will have a condition you're born with, but you've got a chance of survival. The surgery gives you a chance of survival. So as I age, I may need a pacemaker. I'm in contact with him once a year and do some tests. And so far we've avoided that because he said, look, the technology is improving all the time. So I'm happy to wait.
The longer the better, hey?
Yeah. I just get a bit breathless sometimes and things, but I'm managing. Or I can actually, my heartbeat can go a bit low, and that's a bit frightening sometimes, but it's okay at the moment. Yep.
And as long as you're keeping an eye on it, I think that's the most important thing, hey?
Oh, I would encourage, with anybody with a condition, health condition, you must monitor it.
And, we were talking earlier about the support when you were younger. What's the support like being now in 2023?
Oh, I have friends and family that are very supportive. It's still not perfect because there's not the people around with my particular condition. Like, if people see my scar, they'll say, oh, did you have triple bypass? And I'll say, no, this is from childhood. And they'll say, what? And then you've got to sort of explain the whole story.
Unpack everything.
And sometimes even health professionals that you come across, they say, what? Tetralogy of Fallot? What? What's that? So you're dealing with being one in a bunch, one in a lot, often. But most people are pretty understanding.
And if you had to give some advice to people living with a heart condition, when you were just talking about the young fella and his mum that you ran into at the HeartKids event, if you had advice for other adults who are living with a heart condition, what would that be to them in living with a heart condition?
I know of one person, and she's 60, so she's a few years younger than me, and she's the only one I know that was born with my condition, and she's looking carefully at me, and I hope I encourage her all the time but she's doing well. What advice would I give to people with my condition?
Even just any heart condition, I think, because we know how important the heart is for you.
Not to be lost to follow-up, because as I've run HeartKids and people within the organisation who've been very helpful, they have said, look, we want to know where long-term survivors are, but some of them are just lost to follow-up. So I think it's important to keep on getting followed up with medical people and just to really monitor your health, because there will be residual effects as you get older.
Yeah, that's very true. Other sort of health conditions can start to form as well, hey, in the background.
Absolutely.
And what about, I think the other important network is your family and friends. If you're a family member or a friend of someone living with a heart condition, is there sort of things that you would tell them, some nice sort of supportive advice you would give them to help their friend or their family member through this journey, whether they've just been diagnosed with one or they're someone who's been living with a heart condition for a little while? Is there any sort of advice you'd pass on?
The one piece of advice I wish I'd have realised back, even in my 20s and 30s, I would have set clearer boundaries for myself. But I think too, being a woman, back when I was growing up, you're conditioned in a certain way. You're conditioned to that you behave not clear on. I know what I'm trying to say. You're conditioned to do the housework. Back then, talk about my age. You're conditioned to help people. Sometimes I went overboard and stretched the boundaries of my health. And so I would encourage people to set firm boundaries, because only you know what you need. And that goes to every area, because only a person that's in their own body knows what they can. Like I went too far sometimes. I would go overboard at work. I would go overboard trying to bring up my children, do things that I could not do perhaps because I shouldn't have done. But fortunately I survived. But I would say that's one lesson I would impart to people: set boundaries for yourself, because no one knows your health like you do.
And as women, you sort of tend to carry a lot of the weight, hey, and then you push your health to the side a little bit.
That's right. And I think it's, even despite the day and age, I think women still do that.
And the heart is not one area of the body that you want to mess with.
Oh, no. If you lose that, you've lost a lot.
That's it. All right. Well, I'm just looking at the time, and I reckon that's all we've got for today. Marjorie, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and your great advice there at the end. Really appreciate all of your insights and being so open and honest, and for trusting us with your story. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, Tahnee.
No worries. It's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thank you.
No problem. Bye.
If this episode has brought up anything for you, or you need some advice or guidance on yours or your family's CHD journey, you can call the HeartKids helpline on 1-800-432-785. To access more information and find out more about the support HeartKids offers, visit the website at heartkids.org.au. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for medical advice from your doctor or healthcare team. Always talk to your doctor about matters that affect yours or your family's health.